This video is brought to you by Full Sail University.
What's up, everybody? Helen here to tell you how to survive the end of the world as an adorable kitten. That's right, we're talking about the video game Stray, which introduces us to a post-apocalyptic world where robots have attempted to rebuild human society after mankind went extinct. But we think there's something deeper at this game's core that's as satisfying as finally getting to scratch a rug. Because what if a game in which you pretend to be a cat, while hanging out with robots pretending to be people, could actually teach us a whole lot about humanity? Let's explore in this Wisecrack Edition on Stray. Do robots make the best humans?
But before we get into it, I want to shout out this video sponsor, Full Sail University. Full Sail offers associate's, bachelor's, and master's degrees in the fields of technology, arts, media, and entertainment. And they just launched a new bachelor's degree in game, business, and esports, which can help students enter the industry from different perspectives, from game development to communications and marketing, to competitive gaming itself. And this new major joins a roster of other cool fields of study like film production, computer animation, sportscasting, and web development. With Full Sail University's accelerated coursework, you can finish your degree in about half the time required at other colleges and universities. Plus, you can complete your classes and coursework online or in person at Full Sail's campus in Orlando, depending on what's right for you. Whatever model you choose, you'll get hands-on, real-world experience in the career path of your choice. Plus, Full Sail accepts new enrollments monthly, so you don't have to build your schedule around traditional semesters. To learn more about Full Sail University's new game, business, and esports majors, or any of their other degree programs, visit fullsail.edu/wisecrack. That's fullsail.edu/wisecrack. And now, back to the show.
Upon entering the world of Stray, we watch our darling, lonesome kitten avatar enter a post-apocalyptic city. Humanity, we learn, has been killed off by a brutal pandemic that only their robot companion survived. Too soon. Too soon. The gameplay obviously stands out from the get-go. You're constricted by the ways an actual cat would move, which obviously involves plenty of jumping and knocking down boxes. The game's been lauded for its realistic depiction of a cat, a feat corroborated by real-life cat fandom. So, by mimicking the abilities and constraints of inhabiting a cat's body, are we actually learning what it's like to be a cat? According to philosopher Thomas Nagel in his paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Nah, Nagel argues that most living things have a sense of consciousness, a subjective character of experience. That means that there is something that it is like to be that organism, something it is like for the organism. But we can never really know what that consciousness feels like. That's partially due to our limited imaginations, as we inevitably map our sense of human consciousness onto other animals. But even if we anamorphed into a bat for a day, our brains have been hardwired since birth for human consciousness. Thus, we would still not be experiencing things as a bat, Nagel explained, but as a person in a bat's body. Sure, we can simulate cathood through adorable video games, but because we haven't lived it from birth, we can't fully understand it. But these limitations actually open up interesting questions about the robots we meet. Because the game positions us from the cat's perspective, it arguably seems to agree with Nagel that there is a consciousness to be had in cathood, even if we can't quite comprehend it. Thus, we can also presuppose the same thing about the robots. They're not human, as much as they try to be, but they have their own kind of consciousness and frame of reference. Their own robothood, if you will. But what, if anything, do robots share with humans? Well, just as you can't truly experience a cat's night vision, these robots probably can't understand the nuances of the human experience, although they have, apparently, taught themselves to get crunk. But they're essentially living in a Nagel thought experiment. As our robot pal explains, the companions started out personality-free, existing solely to perform tasks, but over time, they began mimicking humans and forming societies. First, we encounter a village called the Slums, full of companions who are portrayed as working class or lower class folks. And there's a sense of melancholy, but not despair. It's an actual community, one where they look out for each other. We learned that the robots posthumously discovered humanity's art, music, and society, and this inspired them to try to recreate the human world. Fittingly then, the Slums, despite the grunginess, are chock full of artistic vibes. The robots seem to appreciate all things aesthetic. They keep a beautiful tree alive just for fun, and use neon lights just for the pretty colors. Musicians play music for free, as long as you deliver new song pages. Most of the interactions you have here are bartering or favor-based. If you collect someone's notebooks, they'll do you a solid, and so on. This creates a sense of a pre-industrial society, one where capitalism and commerce haven't quite established a foothold. What we're seeing are genuine signs of community, encapsulated in the way the elders sit in silent collective meditation. We learned that Momo, otherwise considered an outsider, is desperate effort to recover his missing friends, which demonstrates how important companionship is for him. When you rescue a long-lost scientist robot, he's greeted with love by his son and former friends. Everyone is basically kind to you, and even the grouchy Seamus, we learn, is only rude because he so missed his father. What we see is robots interacting authentically with one another, and it gives them a convincing semblance of humanity. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel famously talks about this concept in the context of recognition, which we've discussed before. Essentially, in order to understand ourselves as distinct individuals, we need to be recognized as such by others. Our personhood is thus established through affirming interactions with others who recognize us as human beings. Or, as the Hegel-inspired Jean-Paul Sartre put it, the road of interiority passes through the other. Philosopher Charles Taylor thinks recognition is a vital human need, and that we need relationships to fulfill but not define ourselves. In this way, the robots, through recognizing one another in affirming interactions, are providing one another an essential aspect of humanness. Philosopher Axel Honneth contends that recognition is essential to self-actualization and living freely. This is only possible if you are an active member of a social community, the cohesion of which has emerged from a mutually shared value orientation toward freedom. Basically, you need community to be a fully formed person. Now, a more advanced version of robot society exists in Midtown, which has a New York or Hong Kong feel to it. But we aren't in the slums anymore. Here, arts and crafts are replaced by commerce, and just about every interaction takes place in that context. And a sense of alienation permeates this level. In contrast to the slums, people in public places mostly tend to keep to themselves. When you do try to engage, many of the robots are downright rude to you. Public culture seems somewhat superficial. The closest thing to community is the barbershop, which is still, after all, a commercial space. For the most part, these robots seem defined by their labor, rather than by any semblance of community, or by extension, humanity. What we see here is what philosophers call misrecognition, or as Honneth explains, the withdrawal of social recognition, in the phenomena of humiliation and disrespect. Robots are reduced to their commercial value and their ability to perform labor, rather than their unique identities or attempts at humanness. Taylor argues that when others misrecognize you, it can make you misrecognize yourself. In the lonely nightclub, your companion, who used to be a human, points out what's missing. He used to drink with his friends during the bad times, and the joy of these interactions gave their lives purpose. He sees the lack of recognition as essential to the apparent unhappiness we witness in Midtown. Indeed, commercial relations here make for a cutthroat world. We explore an ugly factory where workers are surveilled by sentinel robots, who also act as police officers. One guy heartlessly gets you arrested, saying, what we see here is that society has progressed from a pre-industrial system of favors, bartering, and small businesses to a cutthroat, corporatized world. That shift is essential to the alienation that permeates Midtown, where everyone seems worried that you're going to steal from them. The transformation recalls Rousseau's theory about the dangers of private property. He wrote, "The first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, 'This is mine,' and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of civil society." Rousseau believed that much human suffering could have been avoided if everybody had told the loser claiming the land to fuck off. Because according to him, civil society was a misguided step away from the state of nature, which is a morally neutral place where people generally act towards self-preservation and with compassion, much like what we saw in the slums. It's fitting that in this capitalist landscape, a police state proliferates via the sentinel robots. This mirrors the real world. As historian Gary Potter explains, the police are primarily there to protect business property first, not human interactions. If that were the case, they would fail miserably. This suggests that a system of capitalism would appear simultaneously with a system of policing to enforce that system of private ownership. And when we make it to the final level, the control room, we find an even more alienating environment. Everything is antiseptic, like a boring office building. The only nature comes in the form of carefully manicured centerpieces, and the only art is a banal postcard-like image of a beach. The robots are also completely different from their downstairs counterparts. None of them have names, and they don't do anything except work silently. When you try to ask them for help, they won't even look at you, and just offer vaguely polite corporate speak. Whereas other robots personally engaged with you, these robots arguably are participating in what Taylor would call non-recognition. He writes that non-recognition or misrecognition can inflict harm, can be a form of oppression, imprisoning someone in a false, distorted, and reduced mode of being. We see that by living in a world where they're not recognized for anything other than the work they perform, the robots have been reduced to the role of, well, robots. And that's in stark contrast to their more human-like counterparts on the lower levels. Interestingly enough, many folks in the slums dream of making it to the top, where they assume life is better. However, your travels from the peaceful community of the slums to the antiseptic depersonalization of the control room suggest they might be wrong. The game seems to argue that progress isn't always good, and the gameplay slowly reinforces this idea. You're able to converse with just about any robot in the slums, but as you move up, you have fewer options to engage. In other words, you are recognized more in the slums. Just like the robots themselves, the importance of art to the human experience is also emphasized by the game's focus on aesthetics over expediency. It's not about a race to finish the game, it's about enjoying the artistic experience along the way. That's something the robots in the slums would know, while the robots in the control room seem incapable of thinking beyond capitalist efficiency. So what can we learn about our own world from this? Well, the game seems to be saying that a big part of what makes the robots, and us, more human, is our ability to connect with one another on an emotional and communal level. And as Ephemera Journal recalls, in the early 20th century, German philosopher Walter Benjamin lamented that long-term, meaningful, and deep human connections have been supplanted by short-term, isolated moments that began to constitute human existence. So, what was the culprit? You guessed it. Capitalism. As the OG Karl Marx explained, alienation is the objective structure of experience and activity in capitalist society. Capitalist society cannot exist without it. Capitalist society, in its very essence, requires that people be placed into such a structure, and even better, that they come to believe and accept that it is natural and just. And that's exactly what we see in Stray. As the world becomes more capitalistic, the robots become more alienated from one another and from you, which is wild because you are so cute. Their total absorption into consumption and status in Midtown goes hand in hand with their lack of socializing. We're socializing only in the context of commerce, theft, and policing. This alienation only escalates as you make it to the top floor, where you see robots who have been completely reduced to laborers, clearly believing that their tasks are natural and just. What all this suggests is that progress under capitalism has a major downside: the breakdown of community. We see this even in Midtown, where entry into practically every community space has a price, in contrast to the slums, where you can roam freely. What it seems to suggest is that we become more robotic, more alienated, and more detached from one another when we define ourselves solely by our ability to perform labor and pay for things. When we fail to foster communities around mutual recognition, we rob ourselves of something fundamentally human. Still, this is a largely optimistic game. Yes, it seems to say that the efficient world of the control room, where robots indeed act like robots, is bad. And yes, the control room seems to mimic aspects of our world where we are, in fact, reduced to our ability to perform labor. But what if there's a way out? What if we can still recognize the aspects of our fundamental humanity? Your robot companion does as much when he essentially destroys himself to override the system and save all the robots. This suggests that even as our own world starts to feel like the control room, that there's still hope for us. Our basic humanity and need for mutual recognition can be our saving grace and foster connection even in the worst of circumstances. And if all else fails, you can go adopt a cat. But what do you think? Is Stray a warning about the perils of late capitalism, or are we reading way too much into a game that your cat could probably beat you at? Let us know in the comments. Thanks to our patrons for all your support, and don't miss our new Patreon perks. And remember, you can join us every Thursday for our weekly live stream. Hit that subscribe button like you're pouncing on a laser pointer, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later!